Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Bridgerton on Netflix. Let's talk about it. So Bridgerton is the first production to come out of Shondaland and Netflix's 9-figure deal. Now, if this is any indication for what's to come, sign me up. Sign me up. Absolutely. This show was incredible. This show was messy as hell and amazing. We're going to be diving through my thoughts on this one. Like I said, this series was produced by Shonda Rhimes, but it was created by Chris Van Dusen, and it was actually based off of the novels by Julia Quinn. Now, this is a kind of Regency era costume drama that centers on the lives of the richest of the rich in society and the scandals, the romances, the drama. I mean, this is exactly what I wanted to delve into on Christmas Day. This was just what the doctor ordered after the craziness, the literal insanity of 2020. Just sign me up. Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of this drama seemed quite trivial in comparison to the torture that we've been forced to live through anyway. So I was more than happy to take a promenade along this journey. But before we dive into my thoughts on this series, just a friendly little reminder that if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's dive into some of these characters. So first off, we have the two main leads, that of course being the Duke of Hastings himself, Simon, and his eventual wife, Daphne Bridgerton. Now, their relationship is kind of the core of this series, although there are plenty of other relationships and romances taking place around them. They are two of the main characters that we kind of focus on and we follow on through their romantic journey. And I like the fact that in this series, the focus here isn't really on this kind of whirlwind romance that takes place. The emphasis is more on the friendship between these characters and that connection that seems a bit more long lasting than, say, a love at first sight situation, which we've seen time and time again. And I think it's beautifully illustrated in that scene where they're standing before the Queen. We'll get to the Queen later on. They're standing before the Queen, pleading with her, asking for a marriage license to be granted to them earlier, as she previously blocked that same request through the vicars or through the priests. And so they're kind of pleading with her, and Simon has this really cute, really adorable soliloquy where he explains the process of how they fell in love with one another. And even though the wedding itself is a little bit shaky, they're not too happy with the positions that they're in, that moment was truly a moment of honesty, and that's something that the Queen could see for herself. And I think it perfectly encapsulated what they were trying to achieve with this romance story and how they were trying to set it apart from so many that we've seen in the past. I will say that the subject of the children situation was interesting to me. There were a few inconsistencies here, because whilst I do think the show had a difficult time trying to balance the trauma that Simon faced as a child and the way that his father treated him and how that impacted the way that he sees fatherhood, it had a huge impact on this guy. And I think it was really heartbreaking, those moments where you see him as a child trying to, tell his father about his achievements and accomplishments and how proud of himself that he was. But his father shut him down every single time. If he even bothered to listen, if he even bothered to open the letters, which he never did. It was, I was so angry. I was literally so angry at the old Duke of Hastings. I was like, this is not it. Literally, this is not it. This character sucks. Absolutely. And it was heartbreaking to see what happened to his mother as well, because if only she had been there to be a positive influence in his life where he was lacking any, things might have turned out differently for him. I was heartbroken for young Simon. Old Simon was a bit of a dickhead though, I must say. Old Simon, even though you understand where the character's coming from and his backstory, what he did to Daphne is unforgivable. Like, let's be straight here, okay? What he did to Daphne was veering on rape, because he had sex with her on false pretenses, okay? He even married her under false pretenses. Like, in the Catholic Church, at least, that would be grounds for an annulment, because he literally lied about the fact that he can't have a child when really he won't have one because of his past trauma with his father. Those are two very different things, and I love the fact that Daphne pointed that out to him. I did feel some type of way about the fact that Lady Bridgerton insisted on on Daphne just forgiving him in order to move forward with this marriage, because quite frankly, she would have grounds to divorce this guy in modern day times. Though of course in this series we are not dealing with the sentiments of the modern day, so we have to just put that to one side, although there are a lot of nods to the socio-political environment of the modern day being explored in the context of the early 19th century. Of course, you have a lot of exploration of feminism here, and that very much features in the relationship between Simon and Daphne, where Daphne very much tries to highlight just how much of a disadvantage she has as a woman. I think it was great to see how receptive Simon was to that discussion, and the fact that he even refused an endowment for her, because it would basically be them trying to pay him to marry her. And this is a practice that's still in place in a lot of other cultures, and something that I personally disagree with, but I like the fact that that was explored in their relationship. And Daphne was very vocal about the disadvantages that she suffers, and how a lot of the things that he can get away with doing, she very much cannot. She very much cannot suffer a scandal, because it would mean ruin for her, as opposed to just, you know, a nasty headline to deal with momentarily for him. Next, let's talk about the Bridgertons themselves, since they are the star of the show here. And here we have a family of, I believe, like 10. Like, there was 10 of them originally, right? Like, that is a huge brood, a huge family. Now, unfortunately, there was the passing of their father that predates this series. So the father's already dead when we meet this family, and one of the sisters is missing, because she kind of pops up at the end for no apparent reason. No apparent reason later on. So apparently overall there are 8 siblings, although for most of the series we only deal with 7 of them. We have Anthony, who is the kind of head of the household, as he is the eldest son, so he has taken the position of the man of the family, who needs to take care of all of the financial issues and also social issues in terms of getting his sisters married off and his brothers married off, and he himself needs to be thinking about being the heir to the Bridgerton fortune, the Bridgerton estate, and getting married and setting up a family of his own so that his name can continue. But unfortunately and unsurprisingly, he has no interest in doing so, because he's too busy falling in love in an illicit affair with this opera singer. And their storyline was cute. Like, I don't know what to say. Their storyline was cute, you know, it was pretty predictable, although she did end up leaving him, which was an interesting turn there. But still, there was no real moment where I felt like she was going to drop everything for him, and vice versa. I didn't feel for a second that he would leave all of the luxury and all of the comfortability that he has as a member of this incredibly wealthy family, the head of this incredibly wealthy family, in order to go off and live with her. I never felt that way, even for a second. He didn't resent his position in the way that his brother did. Like, his brother actually had qualms about the position that they were in, whereas he seemed to live for it. He seemed to enjoy it, other than the responsibilities that came with it. So I never really was fully invested in that side of that relationship. It was fun, I guess. We got some kind of saucy sex scenes, which was fun, but other than that, like, I've seen it all before. What I did find more compelling was his friendship with Simon. That was interesting. You know, Anthony and Simon are in similar predicaments, except for different reasons. Of course, Simon doesn't want to set up a family because of the trauma that he faced with his father, but Anthony doesn't want to set up a family because I guess he's in love with the opera singer, but he doesn't want to give up anything for her. So I don't know really what his position is, but I like their interactions together. I found it hilarious when they were going to kill each other over the whole Daphne scandal situation. That was so funny when they were like, yeah, let me go grab my gun, let me grab my second, let's stand in a field and shoot at one another. What a stupid, what a stupid way to resolve a situation. And the fact that it was illegal even at that time, I was like, what are we doing here? Fools, literally foolish behavior. But it was fun. It was fun to watch. Other than that, like, Pretty Rich Boy, you know, there are many of them on this show. Next, and speaking of Pretty Rich Boys, next we have Benedict Bridgerton and Colin Bridgerton. Now, Benedict Bridgerton was very much a minor character. Like I said, I think he's the second youngest son, so he has somewhat of a role in terms of dealing with Anthony's crisis and kind of helping him out as his second during that whole shebang against Simon. But other than that, his main storyline seems to be one of debauchery as he's living in the art world. world. Okay, he's discovering many, fluid sexualities. As a member of the Bridgerton family, he's been forced to live under the strict confinements of societal pressure and expectations. So he's never really explored that side of society, and that's kind of what he does throughout this series. He even falls in love with that Madame fake French woman. He's also the tailor to all of the wealthy women, and at some point is suspected to be the whistleblower, Mrs. Whistledown of this world. So their little romance is adorable. His exploration of all of these, sexual beings is pretty interesting, but overall I would say that this character is very minor. Like, he doesn't have a huge footprint on the show. When it comes to Colin, he kind of sneaks in near the end there, where he develops a romance with Marina. Now, Marina is a very interesting character that I guess we could dive into here, but I wanted to talk about the Featheringtons in a whole different section. But Marina is a very interesting character because she is a character who comes from outside of the confines of this society. She's just a farm girl who lives in the country, and so when she gets dropped into the middle of the season where everyone is so competitive, everyone is starved for attention, they want the attention in order to meet their perfect match so they can go off into the distance and get married, she's dropped in the middle of this mess. And she becomes the it girl almost instantaneously. People fall for her charm, they fall for her exotic looks. We'll talk about that in a second. But with the character of Marina, it's really interesting because she's set up as this huge deal at the beginning, the kind of main rival against Daphne, but she kind of just fades away throughout this series. She never really has a lot of interactions with the major players of the show because her storyline kind of confines her literally to her bedroom. She's kind of set apart for a lot of it because of this huge scandal that she is pregnant. She's pregnant by this random other guy, Sir George, who's off in battle in one of the many wars that took place in Europe during this time. And so you never actually even see Sir George, you never really see the love that's shared between them. So this whole storyline very much leaves her in a corner until, of course, she gets enveloped into the Bridgerton family with her almost marriage to Colin. Now, that was under false pretenses because she essentially just wanted to get married to him as soon as possible so that she wouldn't have to deal with the drama surrounding the scandal that she is pregnant before marriage. She was going to try and trick the guy into thinking that she had been pregnant by him promptly after getting married to him as soon as possible. And I have to say, I wasn't the biggest fan of this storyline. I truly wasn't. Listen, I have to say, I had a fun time with this show. I'm going to be singing its praises throughout this review. Believe me, it was so much fun. But I didn't love the fact that in this instance, this woman of color was trying to swindle this man into marrying her so that, she could pretend like the child that's already inside of her is his. Didn't love that. Really didn't love that. Could have used without that. But at the same time, this storyline does raise a very important point, and that is just how powerless women were. Women who were single mothers, who had children out of wedlock, just how little they had because of these societal norms and the societal pressures on women especially, and the fact that none of this responsibility was placed on men. None of it whatsoever. They could continue sowing their wild oats, as Anthony said. Listen, if they can continue doing whatever they wanted and they wouldn't have that same pressure, that same responsibility as women, unless of course people found out, because when people found out, that's when the men would be pressured into marrying the woman. But as long as it was a secret, they were free. They were free to roam around and do this many times over. Meanwhile, the woman had to face the consequences of that all on her own with no power, no money in society. So overall, I would say I was pretty mixed when it came to the character of Marina, because on the one hand, I didn't love the fact that they portrayed a person of color as being quite deceptive, dishonest, especially against a relatively cool guy like Colin. And also at the beginning, she was very much fetishized by the men in their society. Now, I thought that they would perhaps touch on why that was, and we know why that was. We'll get into that later, but they never do. They just kind of say that she's this, beauty, especially in comparison to the other Featherington sisters. That's just kind of the only explanation that we get as to why people are instantaneously fascinated and enamored by her, when really it's a fetish. Like, it's absolutely a fetish of this light-skinned black woman, but they never really touch on that. But at the same time, I had mixed feelings, like I said, because I did enjoy the exploration of the powerlessness happiness of an unmarried pregnant woman at this time. Now, I would say that the storyline with Colin Bridgerton could have been saved if he'd at least ended up with Penelope. I liked the character of Penelope. Sure, sometimes she made some mistakes, but I did enjoy the character of Penelope because she seemed like someone who was genuinely coming out of a place of love and of care, especially in her interactions, her earlier interactions with Marina. I did feel like this love triangle situation should have concluded with Penelope and Colin ending up together at the very least for our troubles. But no, he ends up going off to Greece or wherever in his like world tour, and she ends up alone and unfortunately doesn't end up with the guy that she was really interested in. Maybe we'll see a change to this in a follow-up season, which I very much want, by the way. I very much want a season 2 of this show, but we'll see because I feel like this show was incredibly expensive for Netflix to produce. We'll see how many subscribers potentially were brought in by it. I mean, that's kind of the name of the game right now, subscribership, so we will see. But hopefully they do kind of expand on the character of Penelope, especially after that huge reveal at the very end that she is in fact Mrs. Whistledown. Next, let's talk about Eloise Bridgerton. She was a character. Like they kind of give her this quest to find out who Mrs. Whistledown is, which is cute. You know, it's fun, but she's not really a major player. I preferred her interactions with her sister and how they explored how she sees her sister as this perfect, you know, personification of these Georgian values. Whereas this whole Whistledown situation, it was fun, it was cute, but it wasn't like outstanding. You know, it would be interesting to see what she's like during her season of coming out and being eligible to marry. So I think in the follow-up season, I would definitely like to see that. But this whole Whistledown business was like, it was a wild goose chase for her to just do something throughout the series. And finally, let's talk about Mama Bridgerton herself, Violet Bridgerton. Now, she's a very interesting character because she's the mother of this huge brood of kids who are all, you know, messing up in their own ways, apart from the 2 younger ones who are just minding their business. But she has a huge household to manage, and it very much seems like she's done so with mixed results. And in the case of Daphne especially, I really enjoyed that scene where they came together after Daphne had gotten married and has discovered just how little she knows about managing such a huge estate, a huge household. It very much gave me Rebecca vibes on that front. That whole sequence where Daphne is discovering and going through all the trials and tribulations of married life, as well as her new role as a duchess, and she's trying to kind of manage everything. She's trying to use the information that she gained from her mother, but it turns out she's coming up short because there's still so much that she doesn't understand. And you very much get that Rebecca storyline playing into the housekeeper as well, not being as much of a fan of her and comparing her to the late Duchess, that being Simon's mother. So I can see where they were going with that. That was cute. But I very much enjoy that confrontation that Daphne has with her mother and telling her that she basically taught her nothing. She basically taught her nothing because of these Georgian conventions about, you know, not talking about sex, not talking about relationships in such an intimate way, and the distance that she had from her mother, who, yes, was her mother and yes, was in charge of, you know, keeping the household in check, but wasn't quite as connected to her kids as, say, like a modern day mother would be, because she would have nannies and she would have maids that would take care of her, you know, other people that would insist in doing that. And so her mother wasn't quite as connected with her. She didn't really teach her as much as she could have, and Daphne is kind of confronting her about it, and her mother's response honestly leaves a lot to be desired, because what else can she say other than she'll try her best with her younger sisters. And by the way, I absolutely loved Lady Danbury. I think she was an excellent character, and I think Ajoa Ando did an excellent job portraying her. She was fabulous. Okay, so next up we have the Featheringtons. Now I'm not going to go through each of them individually because quite frankly a lot of them aren't that remarkable. So first off we have Portia Featherington, who is brilliantly portrayed by Polly Walker. Listen, this character, I mean, she's a classic Lady Macbeth type of character, incredibly ambitious. She wants her kids to rise to the top, okay? So she buys them the best dresses, at least until they can't afford them any longer. She buys them the best clothes. She makes sure that they are front and center at any ball as much as she possibly can to really increase their chances of getting married and of, you know, increasing their standing in society. But unfortunately, the cards do not fall in in her favor, and she ends up with a whole big Marina mess landing on her lap, which actually sees their entire family being shunned by society in shame after the revelation that Marina has fallen pregnant outside of wedlock. Now, there are many examples in this series of the terrifying mamas who control their daughters' lives and push them towards, marriage so they can better their standing in society. But the Baroness Featherington is definitely one of my favorite examples of that throughout the entire series. But also, having seen all of the trials and tribulations that she has to deal with and that come her way throughout this series, you also have to admire the woman. Like, you really just have to tip your hat to her because she deals with so much. And when you think of how incompetent her husband is, can we talk about how incompetent Lord Featherington really is? He has this huge gambling issue that leads to the downfall, leads to the financial and social ruin of his entire family. He literally sucks. Okay, so the fact that she has to deal with that on top of her daughters, on top of Marina, I mean, it's a lot. So you have to tip your hat to this woman. I already talked at length about Penelope and how I feel that her relationship with Colin should have been resolved in this series, especially considering that she is the only plus size character in the show. I would have liked to see her have her moment in the sun as opposed to just trailing behind Eloise as she does for a lot of the show, because unfortunately, even though the series does explore some feminist ideals, especially in the context of the early 19th century and how desperately they were needed, it still ultimately does fall into that trap of the kind of male gaze of having these incredibly beautiful women being thrust into the forefront of this story, and in the meantime, this plus size woman who's not, as conventionally attractive as she would be deemed to be if she was slimmer, is kind of just the sidekick of Eloise. Until, of course, we find out that she's Mrs. Whistledown, but that's at the very end of this show. I would have liked to see her have a romantic, a sexual experience with Colin of her own, because she bloody well deserves it. And this whole thing about Colin seeing her as a little sister, which is basically because she's plus size. Like, let's keep it real. Basically because she's not as conventionally pretty. Like, can we just do away with that? Okay, can we just pretend like that's not a thing? Like, we're pretending like racism isn't a thing in this entire show, which we'll get into. Like, if your imagination can stretch to Regency but black, can we make it, romance and also plus size? Thank you. Now, speaking of Regency but black, let's talk about some of these story elements of this series, and in particular the incorporation of people of color in this timeline, in this society where that very much would not have been seen in real life. We're dealing with an almost colorblind cast here. Not quite colorblind though. I would say color visually impaired, because we'll talk about the situation of colorism in a minute. But I think it is pretty groundbreaking to see a series of this scale, of this opulence and this richness, this wealth being explored with characters from all different backgrounds. It's just refreshing, okay? Because at this point, we know the history books tell us otherwise. We know that the transatlantic slave trade was happening during this time. We know racism was a thing during this time. But I often say that what really triggers the whole historical debate situation when it comes to TV shows and films is when it's almost the truth, like when we're kind of trotting on the line between truth and fiction. And I think that applies to series like The Crown, which have truthful elements to it, but at the same time take a lot of dramatic license. But in the case of Bridgerton, like, no one is coming here for historical accuracy. Like, it makes it very, very clear that we are living in a parallel universe, so we can forget a lot of the historical context that we otherwise would have been dealing with. I mean, they do have the nod to George III's mental illness in this series, which is pretty impressive because that was a real thing. But then they also have him having this black queen, which isn't historically accurate. Not only that, but is quite bizarrely dealt with in the series, because that's what breaks the illusion of the parallel universe, right? The lack of connection to the real world is the fact that he has a black queen, and it is actually unusual because racism was a thing at one point. That was revealed to us by Lady Danbury when she was talking to Simon, and she revealed that at some point there was racism against people of color in that society. But after George III married his queen, Queen Charlotte, I believe she's still called here, even though the real Queen Charlotte very much was not a woman of colour. After he married her, that's kind of what elevated people of colour in that society to different positions, to become dukes and duchesses and ladies and whatnot. And so we have this very interesting origin story for the people of color who have elevated themselves to the upper echelon of society, but that's just kind of dropped in the middle of the series and never explored again. Like, never. After that dialogue between Lady Danbury and Simon, it's never brought up again. Ever. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. With that whole speech came the issue of, oh no, now we have to think about historical context, because now we have to ask ourselves, well, okay, if there are people of color who are in the upper echelons of society, why is the slave trade going on? Like, now we need to ask ourselves these complex problems, and we didn't need to do that. Until she said this, we could have just lived in blissful ignorance, but when she brought it up, it was just like a ton of bricks fell, and I was kind of broken out of my stupor and realized that actually this is supposed to take place in a plausible version of reality, and that's just a huge mistake on the show's part. Cut that bit out, okay? Just ignore that bit. Just live in this alternate reality, because it makes no sense for there to be rampant racism before the king marries a black woman. It makes no sense, because it changes the context of everything. And the second issue that I had in regards to the way that people of color were portrayed in this show is that there was quite a bit of colorism. Quite a bit of colorism indeed. I was disturbed. Truly, like, I was offended and disturbed. All of the women of color, especially, who are portrayed in this show are lighter than a paper bag, or thereabouts, you know? Like, it seemed as though there was a stringent paper bag test in this series. The only exception is Lady Danbury. Everyone else is of a lighter complexion, and it was disappointing, because why not have a variety of black women being represented if that's the route you're going to go down? And not just black women as well, but, you know, Asian women, you know, other ethnicities being represented in this series. Unfortunately, there was never really any commentary on it. Like, it wasn't as if this colorism, this rampant colorism, existed within the context of this society, because in the background I would be seeing a ton of dark-skinned women dancing in their beautiful frocks, you know, dancing the night away, and I was wondering, like, what's their story? Like, they seem to be people who are also members of this upper echelon of society, so why can't I find out more about them? Instead, the main characters, who are characters of color, seem to all be lighter skinned people. I would say that when it comes to the story itself, I think the script was kind of a weak point. There were many instances where the characters seemed to just be talking nonsense, like absolute rubbish. I feel like the script writers were like, oh, this sounds like it would come from the early 19th century, but really, oftentimes they were just speaking gobbledygook. Like, even though it's said in a British accent, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is something that people from the 19th century would have said. They use a lot of antiquated language and a lot of phrases that sound like people in the early 19th century would have said. But upon closer inspection, a lot of this is nonsense, okay? A lot of this is just made up gobbledygook nonsense. The dialogue leaves much to be desired. It's quite laughable. It plays into the cheesiness aspect of the show. Now, finally, this would not be a valid review of Bridgerton without a huge round of praise for the costuming department of this series. Geniuses. Every single one of them. Oh my god. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? The costumes in this show are stunning. They are exquisite. The opulence, the wealth, oh, it can be felt through the screen. Also, the costume jewelry, I actually had a really fun time with. Like, I have this thing with jewelry, especially olden time jewelry, that I was fascinated with in like 2019. And so there were a lot of like costume jewelry that I recognized as being replicas of real life royal crowns and royal jewels. And I found it fascinating how they realized all of that. Now, some of it was a little anachronistic. Like, there was a lot of Art Deco jewelry that I was seeing in the early 19th century that didn't quite make sense. But still, I loved the costuming, the jewelry, the opulence of it all. There are a lot of Empire line dresses, which was a very popular style of dress, but it wasn't like the only one. Like, it wasn't the only style of dress. And pretty much all the dresses that the women wear on this show are Empire line, but their boobs look great. Like, their boobs look absolutely spectacular. Hats off to the costume department. Just mwah. Truly, if they don't win an Emmy for their work on this series, I will be very upset. I will riot, because because I would argue that the costumes themselves became characters in their own right, especially when you deal with the house colors and the way that the Bridgerton household had a lot of, you know, blues, a lot of cool tones, whereas the Featheringtons had a lot of yellows, these obnoxious greens, obnoxious spring colors just turned up to become technicolor. It was really deliberate, it was really artistic, and I think it just elevated the show to a whole different level. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Bridgerton a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Bridgerton, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!